Der Bootsmann ist nicht immer angenehm, gefürchtet ist auch mancher Maat. Und ist auch ihre Nähe aufrecht unbequem, im Herzen ist doch jeder Kamerad. Ah, welch ein See, die Brise des Reizens, fernab von Tinte und Pergament.
Nanu, Reinhard, hätte nie gedacht, dass ich Sie mal so vergnügt sehe. Und dann auch noch beim Singen. Was ist denn das, ha? Haben Sie endlich ein fesches Madel gefunden?
Nicht so fleißliches, das versichere ich Ihnen. Es ist lediglich das einfache Vergnügen, dem stickigen Büro zu entfliehen und die frische Luft der Natur zu genießen.
Ja, schade. Und ich habe schon gehofft, Sie könnten mir ein paar scharfe Bienen vorstellen. Naja, dann muss ich halt wieder auf Wirtshaus zu gehen.
Müller, wenn Sie sturzbetrunken ins Büro kommen, schwöre ich bei meinem, ich werde Sie Kiel holen, bis Sie wieder nüchtern sind.
Ja, schon gut. Aber sagen Sie mal, was finden Sie eigentlich so toll am Fluss? Ist ja ganz nett, verstehen Sie mich nicht falsch. Aber der Gestank ist, ehrlich gesagt, ziemlich scheiße. Ach, pfui Teufel!
Müller, Ihr Stirlander wird buchstäblich mit Scheiße nachbesuchen, weil er glaubt, dass wir Dämonen haben. Also, erzählen Sie mir nicht herablassen, dass der Reich nach Scheiße riecht, wenn Sie das Zeug wie Geschosse auf Fremde schleudern.
Sag's was, Herr Wunsch. Wenn es hilft, dann hilft's, oder?
Was zum Teufel wollen Sie damit sagen?
Naja, die Leute, die beworfen würden, die haben keine bösen Geister gesehen, oder?
Was? Das beweist gar nichts.
Ich geb's einfach zu, dass es Dinge gibt, die ihr Städter hat nicht versteht. Demut steht euch gut, wisst? Die Madeln stehen drauf, hab ich gehört.
Nein, tun Sie nicht. Und das ist nicht der Punkt. Ich kann Wallerspassanten anspucken und behaupten, es vertreibt Geister. Aber solange Sie nicht aktiv nach einem Geist suchen und diese tatsächlich durch meine Tat abgewehrt wird, bewegt mein Spuken einen feuchten Kehricht.
Wenn es euch hilft, nachts ruhig zu schlafen oder Geister, ist ja recht. Bevor ich's vergesse, wo wir gerade von Dingen reden, die von oben kommen. Da hat mir so ein Schiffer vorhin das in die Hand gedrückt. Kam direkt mit dem letzten Frachtkahn aus dem Süden. Aus Nuln.
Nun? Was wollen diese Gecken von uns? Oh, sagen Sie mir nicht. Sie sind unzufrieden damit, wie wir den Wissenland-Sudenland-Konflikt im Ostermark-Bericht dargestellt haben. So Sie mogeln die Narren. Wir haben nichts als die Wahrheit geschrieben. Wie dem auch sei, geben Sie her. Aus dem Licht, Sie verdammter Ochser! Ich kann ja nichts sehen!
Hoppala, Entschuldigung, mein Fehler.
An die fleißigen und pflichtbewussten Schreiber des Kaisers, bla bla, loben den Stil und die Klarheit, bla bla bla. Und vorteilhafte Darstellung der Geschichte unseres Landes, bla bla bla. Wir bitten eine längere, detailliertere und vorteilhaftere Darstellung für Nuln gegenüber Altdorf.
Oh, die Gockel da unten schreiten sich wohl gern, wenn die schöneren Fähren hat, was?
Lächeln. Als ob ich meine Integrität für diese russisch-schmierten Wichtigtour opfern würde.
Glauben Sie, die kriegen uns dran, weil wir die Griffen beim letzten Mal erwähnt haben?
Ach, nein. Es sei denn, Sie finden tatsächlich die Willenskraft Ihrer Herrscher von Ihren Sandkissen zu heben. Wissen Sie schon, nur um Sie zu ärgern, wird unsere nächste Arbeit über meine Heimat handeln. Nordland. Denken Sie nur mehr. Eine der nur 2 Provinzen, die die glorreiche Reichsflotte stellen. Keine stinkenden Flüsse mehr. Das offene Meer. Wir sind aus hartem Holz geschnitzt. Wir trotzen den Stürmen und der See, während diese verweiligten Südlande auf ihren Kissen liegen. Unsere Treue ist so unerschütterlich wie die Klippen selbst. Mögen andere an unserer Treue zweifeln. Die Kaiser selbst bezeugen seit jeher unsere Standhaftigkeit für das Reich.
Reinhard.
Was? Was ist es?
Schauen Sie mal auf das PS da unten. Sollten die Herren Archivare diese Bitte nachkommen, wird eine Aufwandsentschädigung von 5 Goldkronen pro Person bereitgestellt.
5 Goldkronen?
Das sind verdammt viele Humpen Bier, Reinhard.
Wissen Sie, Müller, ich habe schon immer gesagt, dass der industrielle Fortschritt das Rückgrat des Reiches ist.
Jawohl! Und wer braucht schon frische Luft, wenn man Schwarzpulver hat? Wissenland, Frust und Rauch marschieren wir in dunkler Nacht. Die Eisenkompanie steht hier, die Gräfin unser Leben wird. Mit Schwarzpulver und kaltem Stahl bezwingen wir sie allzumal. Wie sind der Hammer hart und schwer, das stolze Nulner Eisenherr. Gedeckt der Schmack von Solland zwar, die Rache kommt mit Donnerhall. Die Sonne schwarz, das Feld ist rot, die Fürsten weder fein noch tot. Die Zwerge sind die Stuhl und hart, das ist die Nulner Lebensart. Die Sonne Sollands hell und klar, wir tragen sie auf immer da.
This video was partly dedicated to you, my friend. Thank you for your patience and patronage. Wissenland, translated literally to English, Knowledge Land, home of the Americans, which in modern times becomes the Grand County of Wissenland. Current Elector Count, Emanuel von Liebwitz, Grand Countess of Wissenland, Countess of Nuln, and Duchess of Meissen. It's yet another province of hardy, stoic, dour, and mildly depressed folks, though in this case, the depression is less due to external threats such as with the provinces of Ostermark, Ostland, and Stirland, but rather due to the unfortunately mood-dampening atmosphere of a land so covered with rock, mines, soot, and black powder. Coupled with, for some reason I genuinely cannot fathom, the strange survivor's guilt the inhabitants are afflicted with following the fall of Solland. The province as a whole may be seen as a sort of sea of the aforementioned trades, surrounding the peacock's nest of Nuln, not the provincial capital, by the way, at least not the current one. Nuln is to Wissenland what Altdorf is to Reichland. As with the imperial capital, its inhabitants are proud peacocks, only this time the preening fops are covered with a generous veneer of industrial nimbus. Southwesternmost of the provinces, it forms a triangle on the map, if said triangle was drawn by a cartographer suffering from Parkinson's. As with any sensible provincial borders, natural structures define the province's boundaries. The Grey Mountains to the west, the Black Mountains to the south, and the Upper Reich to the east, completing the miserable little shape. It's a rather serendipitous geographical condition, as it allows the province to have access to one of the most sought-after resources in the empire, that being minerals, while still having a decent enough farmland, courtesy of the Reich, to feed its population, without having to rely too much on imports from the other provinces. Though thankfully, with the breadbasket that is Avalan just to the east, the food supply should remain mostly stable, even if a particularly bad harvest would strike the province. Before we delve into Wissenland itself, we'll have to take a small detour to the defunct provinces of Solland and Sudenland, both of which used to be neighbors to Wissenland before the dissolutions. The Grand Barony of Solland, home of the ancient Melanchols, preceded Sudenland. Its most prominent symbol and characteristic is right there in the name itself, Sol, the sun. Coincidentally, it has one of my favorite flags of the provinces. It consists of a grim skull inside a burning sun, with an imperial cross stamped on its forehead, along with another cross and a twin-tailed comet framing said skull and sun. All this displayed proudly upon a field of deep black. It's a pleasant minimalist design, I say. It's certainly more aesthetic than a literal damn chicken, or just another animal holding something. Unfortunately, besides its fascination with the life-giver and its fine Sudenland wool, the province is not one of great prestige nor importance. In fact, I dare say the defunct province is known more for its failings and ineptitude. Firstly, after the death of the great emperor, the wolf of Ulrich himself, Mandret Skavenslayer, the elected emperor from Solland, Otto, was a weak-willed, spineless man. The elector counts of his time played him like a fiddle and ignored or disobeyed his commands and laws as they saw fit. Due to this, The Elector Counts after his death found the office of Emperor to be a rather bullyable one, setting a bad precedent for the future, thus sparking the Age of Wars. Secondly, and arguably what the province is most known for, is its utter annihilation and trampling under the Warg of Gorbad Ironclaw in 1707 IC. The Orc miscreant made a mockery of the province, erecting his lovely theme park of Warland, a must-come for all greenskins looking for a good tussle. By the way, that's Orc with a C, not a K. This is Warhammer Fantasy, not Warhammer 40k. The Elector Count Eldred lost his crown, his runefang, his province, and most disastrously, his life. Thankfully, the runefang itself was later recovered and stored in the Imperial Treasury, before finally landing itself in the hands of Reichsmarschall Kurt Helborg, the finest knight with the finest moustache in the Empire. A bit of a tangent. The naming of the Solland runefang, Grudge Settler, is quite an interesting matter. Unlike the other runefangs, which have one or perhaps two names, sometimes with a casalid one, Solland's has 6. Grudge Settler, Grollhalter, meaning Grudge Bearer, Lightshard, Hellbringer, Warpsbane, and Klingerach, meaning the Sword of Vengeance. Grollhalter, Klingerach, and Hellbringer in particular are interesting to look at etymologically. Grollhalter is a German compound word consisting of groll or grudge and halter to hold, keep, or retain. So Grollhalter literally means grudge keeper. A bit surprising there's no casalid name for it, considering it has grudge in the name, but looking over the casalid words we have information on, I believe the name should be Damas Bezeki. Damas is a casalid for grudge, while Bezeki is owner or possessor. So as a whole it means grudge possessor or the possessor of grudges. Klingerach is another German compound, but this time not in the proper structure. Klinger is German for sword, while Rache is vengeance or revenge. But in proper German the modifier usually comes before the noun, so it should be Racheklinger, vengeance blade. But if you want to keep the blade of vengeance structure, it can also be worded Klinge der Rache. Lastly, Hellbringer. It seems to be a compound of hell, which is bright or light, and bringer is self-explanatory. Thus, Lightbringer, a fitting nomenclature giving Solland's obsession with solar imagery. And no, hell in German does not mean hell as in the fiery inferno, that's Hölle. To complicate the matter, Sudenland, or as it was known then, the Free State of Sudenland, enters the scene. In 2272 IC, it became independent of Wissenland, courtesy of its nobles claiming a long-lost link to the throne of Solland. Source: my grandfather said so, and he's the wisest man in the empire. Obviously, Wissenland didn't like an upstart region suddenly detaching itself with dubious claims, and conducted efforts to pull the region back in. Border conflicts were frequent during this time, until Wissenland finally knocked the little shits on the head hard enough to stop their nonsense just before the Great War against Chaos started. But alas, the lands formerly of Solland were still essentially a wasteland managed by none, so after the Great War against Chaos, that is 2305 IC, the Emperor Magnus the Pious reformed the province, nabbing some parts of southern Wissenland and incorporating them with the lands of Solland to form the Grand Barony of Sudenland. A staggeringly wise decision to just take a region of a nation and forcing its proud people to suddenly become a part of another nation altogether. And mind you, said nation being the very one they fought to stop from independence in the first place. Magnus essentially triannons the province, making a decision that made sense to no one but himself, and certainly not to me. Verily, it seems that even though he is a far superior Magnus in Warhammer, the name of Magnus still carries with it the occasional propensity for bad decision-making. And so Sudenland remained a province, ruled by House Toppenheimer. But independence rarely lasts forever, especially when you're as small as Sudenland. During the turmoil of 2512 IC, you may watch my video on Ostermark to understand what that is, Wissenland and Sudenland came into yet another conflict over the age-old independence question. with Elector Countess Emanuela von Liebwitz leading the Wissenland offensive and Elector Countess Ethelka Molrella Toppenheimer leading Sudenland. Comically, all 8 children, yes 8, of Countess Toppenheimer supported Wissenland, rebelling against their mother and consequently letting the province be annexed back into Wissenland. Thus the lands east of the river Zoll are often dubbed Old Solland or Sudenland, and the nobles that originated from the former provinces insist it be called that as an act of rebellion against the countess. Yeah, much good it did them. Now, while the Wissenlanders hold no great love for the old Sudenland secessionists, they do hold great respect for the Sollanders, and guilt for the fall of Solland, again for reasons that escapes me. To honor the fallen province, they incorporated the son of Solland into their own flag, having I'm honestly not sure what animal that is, their lion carrying the son of Solland on a banner. Thus, forever until the world breaks apart, Wissenland will carry the spirit of their fallen brethren with them, come joy or come strife. I believe that should be quite enough to bring us up to speed concerning Solland and Sudenland. I do apologize for the sudden and circuitous detour, but I thought it the perfect time to also discuss said defunct provinces that would be way too short if made into individual videos. Now, let us return to Wissenland proper. We may divide the province into several regions. A farmland region bursting with fertility courtesy of the Reich, a rugged rock-strewn mining region in the west and south near the mountains, and a sort of transition region in the middle where the damp grass slowly mixes with more and more dry rock. As you can see, there are quite a lot of streams and rivers running through the province like veins of ambrosia that bestow life upon those who partake in it. These veins complete the network by feeding into the river Zoll, the namesake of Old Solland itself, which in turn feeds into the Upper Reich. But water, just like fire, has both a creative and destructive aspect. In the spring, the particularly bad winter of Wissenland mercifully ends, the thick layer of snow blanketing the province melting at last. Unfortunately, snow is just another form of water, and water loves to coalesce. This inevitably leads to the rivers being oversupplied, greedily flooding the towns that suckle at their teats. Meissen in particular is well acquainted with this phenomenon, especially when a great flood almost made the town into a mini Atlantis in 2484 IC. Moving away from the embrace of the Reich, the geography gradually gives way from grassy plains to expanses of stone and dry earth. The land is littered with so much flint that it can be properly said to be the bounty of this specific region, so much so that young children often earn their first wages clearing these offending protrusions that lie in the way of plows. Perhaps this is the sort of experience employers mean when they want work experience for entry-level jobs. And as we know, when it comes to young children, whenever they have a vaguely hand-sized projectile in their hands, they get the nagging urge to hurl said object with a hefty swing of the arm. With so abundant a material, well, it's no wonder the children of Wissenland are so adept at hurling missiles at crows and other small critters, catching themselves a decent meal. Well, that and generally being a nuisance with their hobby. Truly, the rustic life is a wonderful one, is it not? Venture further to the west, and you'll notice the color green diminishing in frequency more and more, until all you can practically see is the bluish grey and black of the industrial mines that this province is most famous for. There's barely enough tillable land to sustain the nutritional needs of its population, but certainly enough mineral wealth for the magnates of a province to enjoy the profits, and the workers to enjoy the privilege of breaking their backs, crawling through caverns, and straining their muscles to break off ores to feed their families, and the magnates' wealth. But, if you notice from the map, these mountains are also inhabited by the Dawi. The dwarfs of the Holz, Karak-Norn, Karak-Hern, and so on. And if you have even a smidgen of idea about the Empire's oldest ally, you know they are more territorial with their possession than a border collie with its owner's flock. The Imperials have managed to at least set up mining agreements with the Dawi, the mountain's bounty abundant enough, even with the restriction of the agreement, to cement this province as the empire's leader in industry. The Dawe, of course, take one look at the work of the manlings and hand out their judgment.
My assessment?
Umgang. But treaties are mere words signed on paper, and vigilant though the Dawe may be, even they cannot cover every nook and cranny of the expansive mountains. Thus, some of the more brave, desperate, or idiotic Imperials dare to conduct illegal mining operations. If they are found, Sigmar himself cannot help when Grimnir's wrath descends upon their miserable heads. Of course, all this mining wealth needs to go somewhere. Usually, the Empire's winters are kind enough to freeze the mountain passes shut and strangle trades for months at a time. But Wissenland, in a display of geographical cheating, possesses the River of Echoes, a massive subterranean river that flows all the way to Talea. It allows trade to flow year-round, underground, far beneath the snowy mound. The elector counts happily collect the toll, leaving the Talaeans to manage the dark, wet hole. So, to summarize the three regions of Wissenland, in the east, the children yearn for the fields. In the middle, the children yearn for the rocks. And in the west, the children yearn for the mines. Similar to the Ostermarkers, the people of Wissenland are a depressing bunch. But in their case, it's less because the land is suffused with a cloud of gloom and actively hostile in some regions, more that the people themselves are naturally dour. If I were to summarize them in a succinct phrase, I'd say they are taller dwarves. The Wissenlanders have long had very good relations with the dwarves, stretching back to the time of their ancestors. I believe they're also the province with the highest concentration of Dawi settlements around. The other provinces might have 1 or 2 settlements in their mountains, but Wissenland alone holds 6 dwarven settlements: Kazid Grimas, Karak Norn, Karak Siflin, Kazid Krentas, Karak Hirn, and Kazid Hafak. Such prolonged exposure and proximity to the Dawi have evidently rubbed off on the constitution of the Wissenlanders. They are stoic, dependable, persistent, and of few words, emotions, or excitement. To further prove my point that they're literally just taller dwarfs, give them a mug of ale, and their countenance softens into something vaguely resembling jollity, their lips tuck upwards into a perhaps smile, perhaps grimace, and suddenly they'll find that words flow quite naturally from their mouths, nay, songs even. If you happen to be near a particularly rowdy tavern, you'll find mournful melodies gracing your ears, ballads such as The Lament of Solland, because of course, they can't be too happy now, could they? Why, it would break the whole atmosphere they're building, and appearances must be maintained, you see. Enter the tavern itself, and you may browse the wondrous selection of refreshment every fine establishment in the province carries. Thick mutton stews, bland as the ultramarines, served with a side of flat, glutinous bread, and their famous heavy flinter dumplings, perfect to bash a poor sod's head open in a good old-fashioned bar fight. Though thankfully, what sense, or rather nonsense, they have when it comes to food, they don't apply to their drinks. Fine Bretonnian or Chilean wine will help you forget the gastronomical abominations you just ingested. So, we've seen what the Wissenlanders are like at their best, but what about their worst? Yeah, it's basically the same, just more unbearable to deal with. They're again depressing, though not in the morbid death-induced manner of the Ostermarkers, but rather a stubborn, dull, and headstrong sort of misery. And comically enough, this dullness pairs with a strange religious devotion. You might think a people so devoid of joy would have little care for the spiritual, but the Wissenlanders have a sort of insurance view of religion. Even the smallest village boasts several chapels at the very least, while the larger towns host temples and shrines dedicated to every single imperial god, and often a few local spirits just to be safe. Ah, so they take 1 or 2 days a week to worship, you might think. But no, that is nowhere near enough coverage for the Wissenlanders' comfort. That leaves far too much exposure to potential smiting. Rather, they prefer a strategy of comprehensive coverage, taking a few minutes each day to rotate their way through the Pantheon. They don't just worship one or two gods, heavens no. That would be a terrible investment portfolio. Lack of diversification invites disaster. Oh sure, Sigmar protects, but in the winter, Ulrich holds the reins in determining whether your toes freeze off, and Tal holds dominion over whether the beasts of the forest are feeling particularly peckish for human cuisine. The Wissenlanders call this true devotion, a strong faith, piety. The other provinces call this hedging your bets, or an overly blatant spiritual vanity. As usual, all the imperial gods are honored here, and as usual, Sigmar, Tal and Raya have special prominence, and as usual, Ulrich gets the boot, because this isn't Middenland or Nordland, and the Wissenlanders don't particularly care for him beyond placating him enough so that this year's winter will be slightly more forgiving. And why stop at the human gods? Given their good relations with the dwarves, some towns like Wissenburg and Meissen have temples and shrines to the dwarven gods for the Dawies' use. And finally, when it comes to their speech, it is as one would expect from their dwarven influence, a naturally depressing manner. They speak a softened, flattened version of Reichsspiel that acts as an acoustic sedative. It is a drone so monotonous that playwrights use the Wissenland accent exclusively for tragedies and funeral rites. They have no patience for the flowery prose of poets, preferring the simple, short, and practical manner of speech of their shorter Dawi relation. There are a decent amount of notable settlements in this province, but I'll go over some of the ones I find interesting. Firstly, Kropenleben, resting comfortably up the river Hornberg at the foothills of the Black Mountains. This quaint little town is a bustling center of trade, particularly for fur, and a market for Dawi passing through from the nearby hold of Karakhern. As a consequence, the air of the town is permeated with a charming smell of wet fur and unwashed musk. Formerly, the town is ruled by Baron Johann von Kalb, but in reality, the hypochondriac Baron has taken an indefinite length of time to vacate the town in favor of a place more conducive to his health. A place with an air that refreshingly does not smell of crushing responsibility. Of course, a town cannot do without a ruler, no matter what anarchists might imagine in their flights of fancy. Thus, for the sake of not letting the town be surrendered to the ceaseless march of time, the town elders and resident dwarfs have taken up the burden of governance. With the Baron absent for an indeterminate time, the elders, with the enthusiastic legal backing of the Dawi, are planning to petition Elector Countess Emanuel for a charter to become a Freistaat. They are essentially filing for political divorce on the grounds of abandonment. Fair enough, I'd say. From Kropenleben, following along the banks of the river northwest, we eventually reach the largest port on the Zoll River, Meissen. As you might remember, dear viewer, I mentioned earlier that this town had the good fortune of temporarily being turned into a tourist attraction, that being a freshwater Atlantis. So you might wonder, why on Nagash's magnificent shining grin would anyone be foolish enough to call this town home? The answer, dear viewer, as with most things in life, is money. The town hosts one of the finest silversmithing traditions in the old world. Goblets, tableware, jewelry, if it can be fashioned from silver, this town will produce it. For a steep price, obviously. The town's heart is the heavily guarded smelting house, where the raw argentum is processed into ingots, stored and guarded zealously from potential thieving, grasping hands. You might also recall that the Elector Countess holds direct dominion here as Duchess, but do perish the thought that her visits are for administrative purposes. She has subordinates for such lowly occupations. Naivety is unbecoming of you, dear viewer. No, she treats Meissen like a personal boutique, visiting solely to peruse the master-crafted silverworks and add to her already mountain-high collection. Travel further upriver, and we'll arrive at the former capital of Old Solland, Altdorf. There's nothing here, honestly. The only notable thing about it is a little story back in the 24th century IC, where a series of cattle thefts led Hugo, the castellan and gamekeeper of the Count of Altdorf, to hire a passing wolf trapper. Because Zinch decided he wanted to take a particularly nasty dump on the miserable inhabitants of Altdorf that day, the wolf trapper just so happened to be a notorious assassin, Hadrian Samoraci, the Talayan wasp. He was in town to do the old infiltrate, assassinate the leading noble, get out, get paid shtick. But seeing that Hugo the Castellan was quite desperate to catch the cattle thief, he decided to volunteer to organize a wolf hunt as a ploy to get closer to the Count. Once he found the culprit, good heavens, it's a persona! Yes, apparently the wolf they'd been chasing was actually a werewolf. Not something you often see in Warhammer Fantasy, but they do exist alongside a few other wary creatures. What's more, Hadrian found the werewolf to actually be a rather fetching woman underneath all that smelly wet fur. The inner fury awakened in him that day, and he decided to protect the woman from her pursuers because, oh, we both deal in death, she's a master, I'm a master, I'm totally not into it because she has fur and a snout. As you say, Hadrian, whatever helps you sleep with her at night. But alas, Archlector Caslane and his merry band of witch hunters declared partial bestiality was an unsightly abomination to Sigmar, and also werewolves just aren't allowed to exist, and managed to slay Hadrian's werewolf. Hadrian swore a vendetta against Caslane, traveling to Nuln to find the Archlector. He killed him, then went back down to Altdorf to actually finish the job he was there for in the first place, and killed the Count. But Zinch wasn't done twerking for this event, so Caslane's death got retconned due to the end times, and presuming the events still went as described, Hadrian never got revenge for his werewolf's death. Ah, fare thee well, Hadrian. You would have loved the furry community. Now then, travel even further upriver, and we'll arrive at the grand capital of the province, Wissenland. It is notable for being absolutely unnotable, home to nothing in particular, the seat of utter boredom made manifest, and a residence so charming it made the Grand Countess completely embarrassed to have it as her official seat of power, much less visiting it and mingling with its po-faced burghers. The Countess detests the city so much, she is trying desperately to petition her childhood friend and current emperor, KFC, to detach Nuln from Wissenland, make it its own electoral province, and give the Toppenheimers the electoral crown of Wissenland. You know a place is truly irrelevant when the wiki writers barely put any effort into the entry. Before we get to the actual jewel of the south, let me just note that there is actually one more quite interesting place in this province, Kreutzhofen. It shares the rare status, along with cities like Ubersreich, of being one of the few non-capital cities to have much information about it. Because this video is already 30 minutes long, and we haven't even gotten to Nuln yet, I'll reserve another set of videos for Kreutzhofen and its brethren. Finally, our journey upriver takes us to the grandest, most cultured, most powerful city in the Southern Empire, a true rival to Altdorf in every metric, history, culture, power, and especially snobbery. The bastion of the South, the crown that glitters with 1,000 jewels, Nuln! The name doesn't mean anything, by the way. Not in German, not in Reichsspiel. As befitting a former capital of the Empire, and indeed the first capital after Sigmar's abdication, Nuln is a true metropolis, perhaps even more so than Altdorf. While the current capital may hold the edge in raw population, Nuln triumphantly eclipses a rival in matters of culture and industry. It is a magnet that draws immigrants from every corner of the old world, while simultaneously pumping out the most numerous armaments in the Empire. Consequently, Nuln and its inhabitants have been locked in a centuries-long rivalry with Altdorf, genuinely believing that they remain the true capital of the Empire. They never cease to slap the Reichlanders with truly petty claims of superiority. Nowhere is this municipal dick measuring contest more apparent than in the matter of bridges. There are many bridges in Altdorf, but the Nulners are quick to point out that unlike their own architectural marvel, None of the Altdorf bridges span the full width of the Reich. To further rub salt in the wound, Nulners boast that their Great Bridge possesses a central section that can be raised by a series of ingenious mechanisms, allowing even massive naval vessels to pass through without diverting to a circuitous route. Now, as usual when it comes to these massive cities, I won't cover everything in this video. Nuln has way too much material to cover, unless I want this video to be an hour long, perhaps even more. Instead, I'll note the interesting aspects and cover everything, including the history of the city, interesting characters in the city, in more detail in a separate video. Firstly, the land the city rests on. Geographically, the city sits on a strategic triangle of land where the river Aver and the Upper Reich collide to form the Reich proper. It is the last deep water port on the river, meaning ships from as far away as Estalia dock here, and even the greedy merchant houses of Marienburg find it necessary to maintain warehouses and agents within the city walls. Now, looking at the map, you will see Nuln is surrounded. Stoicism to the northeast, Averland to the east, Sudenland to the south, and Reichland to the northwest. In a sane world, such a city would be swallowed up by its neighbors, but Nuln remains independent through the superpower of being incredibly rich. They fund whatever army they need, usually by hiring expensive Talayan dogs of war to do the dying for them. Outside the city walls, Nuln's direct territory extends roughly 40 miles north, east and south, and 60 miles west into the Grey Mountains. While the farms here try their best, the city eats far more than it grows, relying heavily on river imports. The rest of the province, that fertile wedge of land between the mountains and the river Zoll, is essentially Nuln's backyard. It produces the excellent wine grapes for the Countess's table, the fine Wissenland white wool for her clothes, and the silver ores that are shipped to Nuln and Wissenburg. Speaking of the Countess, while she is technically the Elector Countess of Wissenland, she rarely holds court in the actual provincial capital of Wissenburg. Instead, she leaves the daily governance of the province to a chancellor, whose only real job is to ensure the tax revenues arrive in Nuln on time and in full. This neglect extends to the military as well. While Nuln is defended by well-drilled mercenaries and the iron companies, the rural contribution to the state army consists of billmen and archers who are, let's just say their training budget likely went into the Countess's shoe collection. What does interest a countess, however, is the plethora of guilds headed by guildmasters desperate for the slightest tax reductions or favors in the council. They are so desperate, in fact, that they willingly present her with expensive gifts every day to add to her gargantuan collection. She repays such generosity by giving each guildmaster a position in the city council with influence far greater than the petty merchants and courtiers that flock her court. Again, Nuln is the crown that glitters with 1,000 jewels. Except the jewels are soot-stained chimneys, ironclad smokestacks, spindly towers, and overcrowded spires poking the heavens through a veil of smog. If Altdorf's tasteful miasma of sewage gnaws at the psyche of its denizens and their will to live, then Nuln's industrial smog gnaws at the lungs of its denizens and their will to live. Even though Nuln is hailed as the Empire's crown jewel, it is still very much an old-world city, which is to say, a dirty, crowded, labyrinthine mess of urban planning. Only here, the maze is slathered in soot, smoke, ash from the foundries that never sleep, and, oh, silly me, I almost forgot, the excrements that line the streets. Nuln's very own brown carpet rolled out daily by the citizens themselves. Its cosmopolitan flair comes not from refinement, but from the sheer chaos of its architecture, from the fortress-like palace on the hill to the ramshackle row houses that fill the Neue Stadt. In the cruel winter, The city burns charcoal from the surrounding woods, shrouding itself in a protective blanket that lovingly blots out the sun. Yes, Nuln is a place where you can experience a
nuclear winter wonderland,
localized entirely within city limits. Ah, the ash and snow falling together, black and white specks drifting down like a particularly hazardous confetti. Well, it must be quite a sight. Balance in its own grim way. The Cafeans would probably approve. Not content with just air pollution, Nuln is also home to a pleasing symphony of cannon fires from the Imperial Gunnery School that conducts tests 4 to 6 times a day. The sporadic booms of the cannons are just another part of life in this mess of a maze. Thus, we have the triumvirate of pollution: visual, respiratory, and auditory. A perfect trifecta to make one question if living here really is worth it. Yeah, probably better than any place in Solland. Indubitably. In spite of the soot, the squalor, and the shit, Nuln remains one of the most beautiful cities man has ever built. The decay that the city has endured ensure that the older and less pleasing structures are consigned to oblivion first, thus allowing the city to rebuild better, stronger, and more tasteful buildings. Despite the jumbled maze of the streets, the city planners did pay close attention to one aspect of their city: aesthetics. Parks, arches with scenes carved on them, magnificent statues, and the Great Bridge of Nuln are a testament to the Enlightenment and its appreciation for things that aren't just brutal industry. Now then, historically, the city has been the Empire's foremost center of learning, with its university shining as a beacon of the intelligentsia for centuries. But unfortunately, that beacon has been slowly but surely eclipsed by the rising star of the north, specifically Altdorf. Nuln's disadvantage lies not in a lack of funding, as the Countess and nobles patronize the academical trinity of the University, College of Engineering, and Imperial Gunnery School as generously as the Medici patronize Florence. Rather, the disadvantage lies in the edge that the progressive ideas of the North have over the more stifled classical learning of the South. Nothing to fear, though, as Nuln still stands shoulder to shoulder with Altdorf when it comes to its military institutions. The military academies supply the city with one of the finest professional armies in the Old World, while the Imperial Gunnery School supplies the city, and indeed the entire Empire, with its famed artillery crews, engineers, and pistoliers. The iron companies, like the Nuln Ironsides, serve as the most professional and well-trained detachment of engineers, gunners, and artillery officers in the Empire. They are trained for war, though, not necessarily for keeping track of infractions and crimes in the city. That task falls to the Watch, and for the very unlucky and treacherous, the Nuln Secret Police. The Watch keeps the order along the streets of the city with an intensity that scales inversely with respect to the distance from the most important and respectable quarters of the city, that being the Aldic Quarter. The closer the district they patrol to the quarter, the more diligent and attentive they become, imprisoning anyone that even looks mildly suspicious, filing the case for later interrogation, though how late the interrogation comes is a matter for debate. Furthest away from the quarter, say in the slums of Shantytown in the Neuestadt, the Watch barely even bothers to send patrols, whether out of dread or simple apathy towards the crime-ridden district. Lastly, let us descend below the streets of the city to the most dirty and miserable yet nonetheless integral section of Nuln: the sewers. Dwarven-made and standing for centuries with tunnels that are larger and safer than those of the other cities. The Skavens, goblins, mutants, criminals, and other dark creatures give them 5-star reviews, quite safe and cozy. This necessitates the creation and funding of a specialized group of watchmen, called the Sewerjacks, who patrol the sewers and ensure Nuln doesn't get a surprise colonoscopy straight to the rectum from down below. It's not a glamorous job, nor very enjoyable, nor clean, nor does it even pay all that well, but it's a job that must be done regardless. Both ends of the employment procedure are two sides of the same coin, minted in desperation and carved by necessity. The applicants are desperate for what little coin they can get. That, or they're genuinely insane, and the employers are desperate for whatever quality of men they can use. Why, I happen to recall a strange time when a dwarf, a slayer at that, and a bloody poet, of all people, signed up for the Jacks. I think that poet had a criminal record, actually. Something about agitating riots in Altdorf. Bah, who cares? Probably died after getting an infection from a rat bite. The dwarf was seeking his doom, which in this case probably amounted to drowning in a knee-deep puddle of dung, feces, and muddy water. Remember, folks, nothing ever happens underneath the city. At last, our quick tour through the industrial heart of the empire is concluded. It's time for a bit of reflection. If Ostermark's motto is Memento Mori, remember death, then Wissenland's is undoubtedly Ora et Labora, pray and work. It is a life of soot-stained hands and hushed prayers, a cycle of crushing drudgery and bureaucratic piety. Usually here I would put some grand speech I thought up to summarize the spirit of the people inhabiting this land, much as I did with Ostermark. But this time around, there is a piece of writing that I believe embodies that spirit much better than I ever could convey through my manufactured epideictic. This writing is neither from an emperor, nor a count or countess, nor from a nobleman, nor even from a poet. It's rather the private musing of a man who, I dare say, was the quintessential Wissenlander, embodying the province's gruff, tenacious, stoic, yet deeply melancholic roots. It's from the diary of one of the most famous and skilled engineer of the modern age. Let us strip back all manner of grandiosity, of verbose oratory, and listen to the private thoughts of an engineer, a simple man, a father.
The fact that I have become, by dint of my skill and labor, one of the preeminent engineers in the Empire, is a matter of considerable pride to me. Not a day goes by without me giving thanks to Sigmar for his grace in granting me my gifts of invention and the moral character to use them wisely. And yet, all these things pale into nothingness beside the greatest creation of my life, the one that fills me with joy beyond compare, and in earnest of which I would gladly give up all else. My son, Magnus, the priceless jewel for the sake of which all else has been done. I am proud of him, though he doesn't know it as he should. I am old now, and I write these words for posterity. One day, he shall rise up and shake the empire with his deeds. He has the skill, and in time, if the fates are kind, he will discover the will.